Welcome back, my viewers. Tonight's story is one of those slow burn nightmares that crawls under your skin and lingers long after the lights are out. A simple job in a small town restaurant becomes something much darker, something hidden beneath your very feet. Let's get into it. I recently got a job at a Mexican joint in a neighboring town. The area was a bit sketchy, but I figured I could handle it. Money was tight, and honestly, I didn't have the luxury of being picky. The night shifts seemed ideal, quiet, with most of the day to myself. The place itself looked alright, clean enough, decent food, and a regular flow of customers. But the manager, Carlos, gave off a vibe that was hard to ignore. He always kept things just a little off. The hours he gave me were garbage. He never cared about health codes or safety policies, and he had this slick, don't ask too many questions attitude that didn't sit right. Still, I needed the job. About 2 weeks in, I was mopping the kitchen floor after closing when I heard something strange. Two soft sounds, one like a low thud, the other like scraping. It was faint but consistent, and it came from beneath the floor. I paused, listening. It would stop, then start again. Thud, scrape, thud, scrape. I convinced myself it was the pipes or maybe a raccoon digging around, but the sounds didn't stop. In fact, they got more distinct every night. Eventually, I mentioned it to Carlos. He didn't even pretend to care, just waved me off and said there was no basement, but I knew that was a lie. I'd seen window wells along the back of the building, the kind that only makes sense if there's something underground. When I brought that up, he got weirdly serious. The previous owners sealed it off. He said, "There's nothing down there anymore. Don't go looking for trouble." I should have left it alone, but the sounds kept coming. One night, I gave in to curiosity. After my shift, I circled around back and knelt by one of the window wells. With my phone flashlight, I tried to see inside, but it was just blackness. I was about to give up when a dim light flickered on down there. It only stayed on for a second, then cut out, like someone flipped a switch and changed their mind. My blood went cold. I sprinted to my car and drove straight home. I didn't sleep that night. The next time I worked, I couldn't help myself. I had to check again. I crept back to the same window and this time saw something I'll never forget. A face, right up against the glass. Dirty, wild-eyed, hair matted to his forehead. He slammed his forehead against the window and gave me this manic, toothy grin. I panicked. I dropped my flashlight and bolted. The next morning, I confronted Carlos. I expected denial, maybe some half-baked excuse, but instead he just sighed and told me the truth. The man was his brother. He was mentally ill and violent, and Carlos had been hiding him in the sealed-off basement to keep him safe from the world. Or maybe it was the other way around. He asked me not to tell anyone, said it was family business, and begged me to keep quiet. I should have walked out right then, but I didn't. I needed the paycheck. Weeks passed. I avoided the back of the building, kept my head down, and pretended everything was fine, until one night, something happened that changed everything. I had just clocked out and was walking to my car when I saw someone standing in the tree line near the parking lot. Just a figure at first, unmoving, but then it stepped forward, and I saw the face, his face, the man from the basement. He was limping, but he was fat. He broke into a run, heading straight for me. I fumbled for my keys, jumped into my car, and slammed the door just as he crashed into the window. He smeared his face across the glass, eyes wild, fists hammering. I didn't wait. I hit the gas and tore out of there. That was it for me. I never went back. From the safety of my apartment, I called the police, but I didn't stick around to find out what happened. To this day, I don't know what became of Carlos or his brother. Part of me wants to drive by that place again, just to see if it's still open. But I haven't worked up the nerve. I still get chills thinking about that face in the dark, about what might have happened if I'd been just a little slower. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel for more creepy content every week, and let me know in the comments, what would you have done in my shoes? Until next time, stay safe, and stay out of the basement. Tonight's story is one of those childhood memories that never quite fades. You think you've outgrown the fear, that time has dulled the edges, but every so often, something drags it all back to the surface. What happened to me around Halloween when I was 7 years old is something I still think about, even now, as an adult. It started as harmless fun and ended in a way that still makes my skin crawl. I don't remember every single detail perfectly. I was only around 7 at the time, but my parents have filled in some of the gaps over the years, and certain parts are seared into my memory, enough to know I wasn't imagining any of it. I'm an only child. It wasn't always great growing up without siblings, but my parents poured all their attention into me. They did their best to make my life exciting and meaningful, especially around the holidays. Every Halloween, they transformed our basement into a haunted house. It wasn't anything extravagant, just old plastic skeletons, fake cobwebs, flickering strobe lights, and plenty of creepy enthusiasm, but they had heart, and that made it something special. The haunted house wasn't just for show, either. To get in, you had to donate canned food. Everything we collected went straight to the local food bank. My parents even designed flyers and passed them out at my school and a few others nearby. Most of the people who showed up were familiar faces, classmates, and their parents, but there were always a few strangers. My parents actually liked that. The more people who came, the more donations we'd collect. We lived in an old, fully brick house in Hatton, Pennsylvania, the kind of place where the walls seemed to breathe at night, and the floorboards moaned with every step. A lot of homes in our neighborhood had the same creaky antique charm, thanks to preservation rules. At night, though, it could be unsettling, even without a haunted house set up. Every year, my older cousins Jeff, Rick, Chaz, and Eric helped set things up. They'd hide in dark corners, dressed in creepy costumes, and jump out to scare people. That particular year, they all wore identical white anonymous masks, the blank, eerie ones with hollow eyes and no expression. It made the whole thing way creepier. That Halloween was especially busy. I remember the crowd building early in the evening, but what I didn't see at the time, and only learned about later, was that a strange man had shown up before everything began. He wasn't with any kids, which was odd, considering the event was for families. He told my parents his wife and daughter would be arriving later, and that he was just dropping off some canned food ahead of time. My parents didn't recognize him, but they accepted the donation, thanked him, and watched him leave. He lingered a little too long though, long enough that they felt a bit uneasy. As the night progressed, the basement became a chaotic mess of screams and laughter. I was racing around with my friends, dodging fake bats and fog machines, when one of them suddenly came up to me crying. She said someone in an anonymous mask had grabbed her wrist and tried to pull her into a closet. At first I brushed it off, thought maybe she got too scared, but something about her face, pure panic, made me take her seriously. I ran to get my parents, and they immediately went to the basement. They pulled all my cousins aside. Jeff, Rick, and Chaz were still in their spots, and swore they hadn't done anything like that. But Eric, he was missing. That's when the tension spiked. A few minutes later, Eric came rushing down from upstairs, confused and breathing heavily. He said he'd gone to use the bathroom, and when he came back, his mask was gone. He assumed one of the other guys had taken it as a prank, but no one had. That's when my parents called everything off. They shut the whole thing down, had everyone leave, and called the police. Officers showed up, searched the house top to bottom, but found nothing. No signs of anyone hiding, no forced entry, nothing. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. That night, I went to bed shaken. I managed to fall asleep, but I woke up later to a soft tapping on my bedroom window. It wasn't loud, just deliberate. I was too scared to move, so I lay frozen under the covers. Listen. Eventually the tapping stopped, and I drifted off again. only to wake up an hour or two later to something worse. Scratching, slow, heavy, deliberate scraping along the window frame, like someone was trying to claw their way in. Something in me snapped. I jumped out of bed, yanked the curtain open, and there he was, a man in an anonymous mask staring at me through the glass, less than a foot from my face. I screamed loud enough to wake the whole neighborhood. My parents burst in, but when they looked out the window, he was gone. We called the cops again. Another sweep, another report, but no evidence. Months passed. Things returned to normal, or close to it. But then came the moment that confirmed it hadn't been over at all. I came home from school one day and found something sitting on my bed, an anonymous mask, just like the ones from that night. Only this one had my name written across the forehead in black Sharpie. We never figured out how it got there. The doors had been locked. No windows were broken. The alarm hadn't been tripped. The police couldn't help beyond filing another report. My parents installed more cameras, more sensors, more everything. They took every precaution you can imagine. And for a while, nothing else happened. But I swear even now, all these years later, I sometimes wake up with the memory of tapping on glass, or scratching along the window frame. Maybe it's just leftover fear. Maybe it's something worse. I've since moved out. I live in a new place. Different town, different windows. But on some nights, especially around Halloween, I still catch myself looking over my shoulder, just in case. Thanks for listening. If this story gave you chills, don't forget to like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more real horror stories. Stay safe out there, and maybe skip the homemade haunted houses. You never know who might be watching. If your pet suddenly starts acting differently, avoiding places they used to love, pacing around the house, staring at doors, you might think they're just being weird, but sometimes they're trying to warn you about something you can't see, something that's already inside your home. Welcome to all my viewers, both returning and new. Tonight's story starts with a cat behaving strangely and ends in a way that still gives me chills to this day. But before we get into it, a quick word from today's sponsor. Before getting into the stories, I'd like to talk about today's sponsor, Factor 75. October is a busy month for me, and I struggle to find as much free time. Thereby, I have less time to meal prep and cook. That's why Factor has been extremely useful for me. Factor makes meeting your nutrition goals easier than ever by delivering fresh, never frozen, dietitian-approved meals right to your doorstep. Factor takes the stress out of meal planning and gives you more time in your day-to-day life by skipping the grocery stores, prep work, and cooking fatigue. Instead, you get chef-crafted meals delivered right to your door. Factor has over 35 meals to choose from per week, including options like keto, calorie smart, vegan and veggie, and more. Factor has been extremely convenient for me lately, as I go with the high-protein options, with my favorite being Peruvian chicken with red pepper, cauliflower, grits, and roasted broccoli. Perfect for after the gym. Head to Factor75.com or click the link below and use code 50nightmare to get 50% off and free shipping on your first Factor box and 20% off your next month of orders. That's code 50nightmare at Factor75.com to get 50% off and free shipping on your first box, plus 20% off on your next box of orders. Let me give you some context, so the story I'm about to tell makes more sense. We've had our cat, Cosmo, for years. Ever since I was a kid, my parents would put him in the basement every night. He shed too much for their liking, especially on their bed, and since he was an outdoor cat, he'd get antsy and meow at 3:00 a.m. if we didn't shut him away. The basement's massive, the largest space in our house, so I figured he didn't mind having it all to himself. But a little over 2 weeks ago, something changed. There's a small landing behind the basement door, just a few steps down. That's where we'd place him before closing the door. He'd usually walk right down and curl up wherever he felt like. One night, I put him on the landing like usual and shut the door. As I filled a glass of water in the kitchen, I suddenly heard him meowing loudly. That wasn't normal. I figured maybe his dish was empty. So I opened the door, but instead of waiting for me, he darted into the living room like he was chasing something. The dish was full. I found him, scooped him back up, and put him on the step again. End of story for that night, anyway. The next 2 nights, it was the same deal. I'd put him in, shut the door, and minutes later, he'd be crying. Every time I opened the door, he'd still be standing on the top step, staring downward, but refusing to go. I tried not to think too hard about it, chalking it up to age or nerves, but it started to bother me. Then came the night he wouldn't come inside at all. He just sat on the doormat, curled up like he was guarding the front of the house. I gently brought him in. He wasn't thrilled, but I let him sleep in my room. It seemed to help. That only lasted a few days. My dad kept complaining that someone was leaving the basement door open, letting the cool air out. I figured it was my sister being careless. She's always been like that. I didn't think much of it. I was just relieved Cosmo wasn't crying anymore. Then one night, I woke up around 2 a.m. and saw a silhouette standing in my doorway. Frozen, perfectly still. The only light was the faint glow from the hallway lamp we leave on. I thought maybe it was my sister, so I called out. The figure stepped away without answering. Too tired to care, I fell back asleep. A couple days later, we finally figured out why Cosmo wouldn't go into the basement. Fleas. The whole room was infested. My dad tore the place apart, spraying, vacuuming, scrubbing everything. He was furious. None of us had seen fleas before. Cosmo had a collar. We couldn't figure it out. My dad ordered us to avoid the basement for a few days, to make sure everything died off. Sounded reasonable. But a few nights later I was in bed when I noticed light flickering under my door. It wasn't steady. It was like someone was playing with the hallway switch on-off. On again. I tried to tell myself it was just my dad, maybe going to the bathroom. But it kept happening. Too long. I lay frozen, heart racing. Until finally the flickering stopped. I didn't sleep well after that. When my dad finally said the basement was clear, I went down after school, eager to play games again. But I knew right away something was off. There were still fleas. Not a lot, but enough to make my skin crawl. I called my dad at work. He told me to be patient, that they'd die off soon. But something felt wrong. Really wrong. The next day, I went back down to check the storage room. Maybe a dead animal had caused the infestation. The second I opened the door, the smell hit me. Thick and sour, like rotting meat. I followed it to the crawl space behind the plumbing area. It was pitch black, and the smell only got worse. I turned to grab a flashlight. That's when I heard it. Breathing, not mine, not faint, steady. Human. It was coming from inside the crawl space. I froze. The breathing grew louder, closer. Then from the darkness, a figure lunged. I saw a hand reach out fast, swiping at me. I barely dodged it. I sprinted upstairs, slammed the basement door, and called the cops. When they arrived, they found food wrappers, chip bags, and a tangle of old blankets stuffed in the crawl space. No purse, just signs that someone had been living there, and had escaped through the storm door in the back. They said it was probably a homeless person seeking shelter. Maybe. But I couldn't stop wondering how long they'd been down there. How many nights they'd stood in the hallway. Or my bedroom doorway. We lock the basement now. Cosmo still won't go near that door, and honestly, I don't blame him.